Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. I'm Claire Ricker. I'm the Director of Planning and Community Development. I'm at the beginning of my 6th month here in the town of Arlington, and we certainly have our work cut out for us. So welcome to the 177 people who registered for this meeting. It may take some time for us to get you all in the room, but this is without a doubt the largest turnout I've seen certainly for MBTA communities, but definitely for most, honestly, public meetings. And this is just such a great opportunity for Arlington to consider what the town can be in the next 10, 20, 50 years. I am always impressed and amazed at the level of interest and curiosity that you all bring to the conversation. The volunteerism and the community spirit of Arlington is truly commendable. And thank you all, for continuing the tradition and being here this evening. We have a lot of work to do tonight. So we have several members of the planning staff and other departments here to help. So if those folks would just wave, and we can, you can click through and see the 177 people. We're all waving. So in early February, we convened the MBTA Communities Working Group, made up of a few city staff, a couple members of the ARB, and 6 community volunteers. Every community member who reached out about being on the working group is on the working group. So I'd like to take a second and acknowledge their work so far. And if you're on the working group, could you please also wave? Wave to everybody. Awesome. All right. So tonight's meeting. Last August, we learned that the State Department of Housing and Community Development was no longer limiting us for an MBTA community zone to the areas closest to the Alewife transit station. And so we are, untethered really from the station, which is both a great thing and a completely different challenge. So remember that MBTA communities is not a housing production plan. We are mandated to approve a zone of reasonable size that allows for multifamily development. We are not mandated to build a single unit at all. We are not mandated to report back to MBTA communities if we have managed to build a unit in the zone. But what we're determining here is potential. Zoning is potential, and zoning should represent the future vision of the town that has been so wonderfully described in all of your vetted and approved planning documents over the past several years. So when you can put a district anywhere in town now, and so this is really what some of the questions that were coming out of the working group, how do you establish criteria? We quickly discovered that we needed to take a much larger view and trying to establish, what community values should be represented by the district. And that is the purpose of our meeting tonight. We are taking a very wide view of the town, and we will be asking you several questions about, what amenities, what values, what you'd like to see represented in this zoning district. So for tonight's ground rules, the meeting is being recorded, but the breakout groups will not be recorded. Of course, as ever, comments and questions are very welcome in the chat. We may not be able to respond to your questions during the presentation. If there is time, we will be holding a Q&A session after our breakout groups. Please be kind. Courtesy counts. We're all here to have a great, robust discussion about this project. It's very exciting. I know everyone has a lot of feelings, a lot of things they want to share about it. I think we can all find a way to do it in a way that's courteous to each other, to our neighbors. We don't have all the answers, clearly, and we shouldn't at this point. I have said to anyone who will listen that I really believe that the best zone, the best MBTA community zone is going to come from the community. And this is sort of our first step to elicit what that is from you all. And so let's be curious, right? Help us to try to figure this out. What benefits can we achieve? And I think more importantly, what community values can we support and promote by considering Arlington's potential over these future decades. So Kelly, if you'd like to launch into the history.
Sure. So thank you, Claire. My name is Kelly Leinema. I'm the Assistant Director of the Department of Planning and Community Development. If you were here during our November meeting, this is a little bit of a refresher. I want to describe an overview of what the requirements of Section 3A or MBTA communities really are. In my experience, when you're talking about zoning or you're talking about state law, it's always good to refresh every once in a while because it can get kind of complicated. So we are here because we have an assignment from the state. We, along with a number of other communities, are required to create a zoning district of reasonable size where multifamily housing is allowed by right. And part of that is because Massachusetts has become very, very expensive. Our rising housing costs are creating challenges. Even in the town, we've experienced challenges in hiring staff because they can't live within a commuting distance of Arlington. And we're also here because as a municipality, we play a key role in how our zoning and permitting determine whether or not housing is built. We are with many other communities on this. We are part of 175 communities that are advancing zoning of some sort. And part of the reason, I think if you're familiar with some of these other communities, you might recognize that there's not a lot of undeveloped land in these 175 communities. That's not just true of Arlington, that's true of a lot of these communities. What that actually means is that we're redeveloping communities. We're going through a process where slowly over time, properties are changing hands and new things are being built, and our zoning, which for a very long time was pretty focused on single family and 2-family homes, and then maybe some like downtown business districts. Our zoning doesn't really allow for middle income, or what we like to call missing middle housing, to be built. We do a lot of reporting to the Census Bureau on building permits. And one thing I can tell you is that between 2019 and 2022, out of the more than 300 building permits that were issued, only one of those was for a development or for a project that was between 3 and 10 units. What we saw was either a lot of single family and 2-family permits, and then we saw a 40B, and we saw development by the Housing Corporation, 2 developments by the Housing Corporation of Arlington. But so what we really aren't getting is anything in the middle. And when you apply that statewide, it does create a middle income housing shortage. And we really are starting to see the effects of this. So the state in 2020 established amended Mass General Law to add Section 3A. I'm just going to quick go through this. It requires all of these things on the left. However, these are a little bit vague. And so the state also in Section 3A tasked the Department of Housing and Community Development to create guidelines that would help communities determine how Section 3A should be applied. And so regardless of what it says on the left here, this is what it means for Arlington. So in Arlington, a district of reasonable size is at least 32 acres. I'll show you what this means in a minute. In this district, we have to allow multifamily housing. And by multifamily housing, we're talking about buildings with 3 or more residential dwelling units. That could be a triple decker, it could be a 4-plex, it could be 6 units, it could be more. And that's part of what we're going to be talking about through the course of this process, is what is appropriate for Arlington. We can't establish age restrictions. So we can't say in our MBTA community zoning district that it's only for senior housing. We also can't say that we can't put limits on the number of bedrooms. So really this has to be appropriate for people of all ages and for families with children. If a builder came in and wanted to build single family homes if they wanted to build single family homes, or if they wanted to build senior housing, that could happen. That's not against the law, but we just can't dictate it in our zoning. We have to have a minimum gross density of 15 units per acre. I'll show you what this means, because if you're just looking at it on paper, it doesn't mean anything. And that also means in Arlington, we have to have a capacity, which is a key concept that we'll explain, for 2,046 units. Our district, as Claire mentioned, it doesn't have to be within a proximity of Alewife, because we don't have, and the state determined that we don't have enough developable land within a half-mile radius of Alewife. But our district or multiple districts have to be at least 5 contiguous acres. And that's really to prevent us or any other community from spot zoning. So this is how it looks when you look at the law all laid out. This is basically what I just showed you. Now, digging into some of these guidelines a little bit more. So Arlington is an adjacent community. When the draft guidelines came out, we were first a rapid transit community, but now we're adjacent because we don't have the developable land around Alewife. This means that 10% of our total housing units, or 2,046 units, we have to have a capacity for that many units in the zoning district that we establish, whether that's an overlay district or whether it's a change to our underlying zoning code. Capacity is somewhat complicated. Some people, you might hear people saying, well, now Arlington has to add 2,000 more homes. It's actually not true. Capacity is a concept about what could be built if there was nothing on the land right now. So if you just imagine that we have a district in Arlington where four family homes are allowed by right. And let's say within that district, you have a parcel, just like the one you see at the left here, which has 2 units on it. It's a duplex parcel. Because 4 families are allowed by right, that parcel, no matter what's on it, has a capacity for 4 units. If there's nothing on that parcel right now, that means it still has a capacity for 4 units. If, let's say that, and ignoring the drawing on the right here, let's say that on that parcel, there was an 8-family apartment building, an 8-unit apartment building. The capacity of that parcel is still 4 units. So capacity is really about just pretend there's nothing there right now. Could you build 2,046 units by right or without a special permit process under the zoning that we create? That's really what our requirement is. Our district size, as we mentioned before, has been reduced from 50 acres, which most communities have, to 32 acres. Again, acres don't really mean much to most people, especially when most even single family homes lot sizes in Arlington are about 5,000 square feet. An acre is actually pretty big. But if you look at this is a 2-scale or roughly 2-scale diagram showing what that acreage looks like. 32 acres is what you can see here on the left side of the screen. This is to scale. So this is what 32 acres looks like in comparison to the overall size of Arlington. At 32 acres with a capacity of 2,046 units, that means that we would have to have about 64 dwelling units per acre allowed by right in that district. That may not be appropriate for the community, and I'm sure we'll hear that from you, or something to that effect. Because the minimum gross density has to be 15 dwelling units per acre. If we were going to say we want our district to have a gross density of 15 dwelling units per acre, in order to get that capacity of 2,046 units, we would have to have a district that's a little bit more on this scale, which is about 136 acres. Another way of thinking about it is in housing types. So if we had a district that is a larger district, about that 136 dwelling units, 136 acre district, you're going to see our capacity, or the kind of housing that could be created could be more like what you see here. And this actually doesn't look that different from what we have in Arlington, in a lot of areas of Arlington right now. If we had a smaller district, we're looking at things that are maybe a little bit more like 6 units, 10 units, 12 units per building. And that gets us a little bit closer to about 64 dwelling units per acre. But really, we're looking at something that's right in the, this is again, what we call missing middle housing. This is what some people call gentle density. It's the kind of thing that isn't really allowed to be built in Arlington right now, even in our R3 district, which is essentially a 3-family district. You can't build a 3-family by right. And so this is really kind of unlocking the ability to do that. Here's some other examples of what this might look like. Again, like a triple decker here, like what you see in Somerville, that's going to get you somewhere between 11 to 30 dwelling units per acre, depending on your lot size. And if you start to go over into like more of like a 3 or 4 story apartment building, you're going to get a little bit of a higher density. but we're not talking about towers in the park here. If you think about it, the other thing, I encourage everybody to go to Mass Housing Partnerships website that they created specifically for Section 3A, which is residency. You can go in there and you can draw various districts and it will tell you what the residential density is right now. So we did that. We drew, these are about 125-ish acre circles around Arlington's commercial districts, Arlington Heights, Arlington Center, and Capitol Square. And this is approximately what the density is. Now, again, this wouldn't be compliant, even if it were 15 dwelling units per acre, this wouldn't be compliant with Section 3A because it's not allowed by right. However, I think this is just to show you what 15 dwelling units per acre looks like. And it's a lot like what we currently have. Again, we get to choose where our location is. It's not required to be around Alewife. And if we are able to do this and we advance zoning to town meeting and town meeting adopts it, there are a number of incentives. So I'm going to pass this over to Claire. She's going to give a quick overview of what the incentives are.
Sure. Yeah. So the MBTA Communities Act obviously is mandating that we establish this zone. The current penalties for breaking the law are a loss of 2 potentially lucrative grants and the local capital improvements funding, as well as we're seeing significant cuts to funding for local housing authorities. That is real and that is happening. Should we pass the zoning, should we be able to establish the zoning, we will remain eligible for MassWorks grants. We recently received a MassWorks grant to do the design for the Mass Ave and Appleton corridor, where we had a bicycle fatality in the last few years. Now that we have received some initial funding from MassWorks, future applications will be looked on more favorably. MassWorks tends to like to support a project from beginning to end. So this is a great opportunity for us to be able to respond far more quickly than we ordinarily would through normal channels to infrastructure needs in the community. The Housing Choice Awards, I think initially we got about $250,000 to do some planning. We anticipate that program will stay funded, and certainly we would like to remain eligible for those dollars as well. And I think, interestingly, most importantly, these cuts to the local housing authority, it seems the state is taking the position that, should, communities decide not to opt into this program, then communities are going to be on their own to fund their own housing authorities. I think there's been a lot of pushback on that, but this is really where we are. The state, some cities and towns are talking about completely defying the act or taking a wait and see approach. The vast majority of cities and towns that are subject to this legislation are moving to compliance. In fact, I've only heard of 8 communities that are subject to this who are looking to, either refuse to comply or somehow otherwise wait and see what happens, if they don't comply by the deadline. There is a deadline for this passage of December 31st this year. Another thing I think we could probably mention here is our participation in the fossil fuel program. I know town meeting has shown a lot of interest in participating in that program. Passage of this, us establishing this zone will also keep us eligible potentially for that program as well. So there's a lot of great, incentives here. There's a lot of great programs that it would really, be unfortunate and difficult for us to not be able to participate in. And then finally, I think, why does compliance matter? Compliance matters because this really gives Arlington the opportunity to live its values, like these that are, espoused in our plans. Certainly, I think, when we hear from community members, this is the sort of, these are the sort of goals, values, future visioning that we are looking to move to. And so I think, we can really look at MBTA communities as an opportunity, a vehicle to get us there. So I think without further ado, are we going to do breakout groups?
Sure. So I'm just going to do a quick description of what we're going to be doing here. So we have, let's see here, we have 127 people here right now. That's way too many people to do this in one group. And we do want to make sure that if you have questions about some of these visioning, if you have just some details that you're looking to ask about some of these these visioning questions, we want to be able to make sure that we can explain them without you having to sit in a queue. So we're going to break off into breakout groups. We are going to be asking you about a number of things. We're going to be asking you about neighborhood amenities. What's your vision for neighborhood amenities that should be within distance of multifamily housing? And then ask you some details about what do you think about proximity and location. Some of these things to you may not seem directly related to housing. These are part of, I think especially in planning, things are always connected. Everything is connected, everything's part of a system. And so understanding where you, and then eventually we're going to bring this back to as part of a community-wide survey, understanding where you and the rest of the community fall on a number of these issues. These are things that are really going to help us when we start getting into the next phase. And that next phase is going to be taking the information that we gather here and starting to create a couple of scenarios with our consultant that we can bring back to you, and then you can provide more direct feedback on. So right now, this may seem a little vague. It may not always seem directly related to housing, but this is a really important step. And there aren't many times when we just get to ask like the big questions about, well, tell us what you want. A lot of times we hear what people don't want. We really want to know what people do want. And so this is a chance to do that. So what I am going to do is first I'm going to stop sharing. And I'm going to put people into breakout groups. We have a number of facilitators here, both staff and from the working group. And you're going to go in these groups and they're going to help walk you through the questions that we're asking. We're going to be doing this through a SurveyMonkey that they'll provide a link to, and then they'll be showing you some examples of what we mean when we talk about X, Y, or Z. Again, we're talking about visioning here. You may have some more technical questions about this, and we do want to make sure that we have time for that at the end of this meeting. So, but for now, let's try to stay focused on big picture, like thinking about what your vision is. And you can always ask clarifying questions, but then we will come back and have some time for Q&A at the end of this meeting. So, this is really, we had like sort of an educational phase before, and it's kind of a startup phase where we were getting our working group together and starting to get our materials, figuring out our technical assistance, getting our consultant on board. We haven't fully engaged them yet, but they're going to be helping us out once we get the results of these surveys. So really that was kind of what happened in December through February. Our working group is incredibly hardworking. This group has met pretty much every other week since we got started. And so I just want to say a big thank you to the commitment that everybody in our working group has shown to this process and making sure that we get it right. And I just really thank you so much. This is like a group of incredible creative people who have provided some really thoughtful feedback. And it makes me very excited about where we're going with this process. Right now, we are at the beginning of March. We are at this March 9 public meeting. This is really kicking off this kind of visioning phase. And so you basically took a condensed form of the survey today. We're going to be releasing that with the visuals so that somebody can take this survey without needing a facilitator to talk them through it. But I do want to check in with our group leaders just to see if there's any feedback that we can incorporate before we make this public, because I'm sure there were questions. Not everybody got through the questions, so I do want to make sure that that people are able to understand what we put out there. The other thing that we're pulling together right now is a series of visioning kits. So if you like to have small group discussions, and if you have friends and neighbors who you think would like to participate in this, we're going to be offering some, you can either download them from the website, or we're happy to print out some copies in the department, and you can come pick them up, and you can run your own meeting with some of these tools. So you can explain so we'll give you the nuts and bolts of section 3A, and then you can start to talk about what your small group vision is. And those are materials that you'll be able to turn back into us, and we'll pull them into our overall analysis of this first phase of the project. I really see this as a way of just reaching as many people as possible. which I think is very important. That phase of the project is going to go until about the first or middle of April. We'll probably close the survey a little bit earlier, but we'll leave some time for anybody who's doing a visioning meeting to get those materials back to us. At that point, we have technical assistance from a consultant, UTL. They're a downtown Boston urban planning and consulting firm, an architecture firm. And they are going to be putting together several scenarios for us. The questions that you answered in many ways can be tied to maps, and we'll be using the aggregate information, and we'll be weighing it in different ways in order to come up with a couple of scenarios. And we'll first present those to the working group, but then we're going to be bringing those back to the community probably at the end of May or in early June. We want to do this before school lets out for the summer. But we want to bring them back to the community so that you can see what we did with what we heard from you. And we may not get it right. This is an iterative process. It's going to take us a couple rounds to get it right. Our biggest constraint is that we're dealing with a deadline, and our deadline is November. And I'll get to why in just a minute. But basically, we're going to be coming back to the community at the end of May and early June to share these scenarios. Then throughout the summer, we'll be like turning those around a little bit, cheering on them. Maybe usually in my experience, people want a little bit of this thing and a little bit of that. And so you got to put it together into a Franken plan, and then you have to make it look right. So we'll try to do that in a way that's not so Frankenstein. But it's going to be heading into a process where we're listening to people's feedback and kind of refining. And that's when we're going to get into a little bit more of the technical nerdy stuff of the zoning, which is going to be like setbacks and heights. And I don't know if FAR is going to be part of it, but we'll talk about parking requirements. And if this is MBTA communities, what do we do about parking? So getting into a little bit more of those details. Right now, what we need to do is figure out where, and then we'll start getting into the what. Once we get to the end of August, we really need to have a nearly finished version to bring to the redevelopment board. And that's because in town, we have a representative town meeting form of governance. And in order to change zoning, we need to file a warrant article. And the redevelopment board needs to have a hearing process. So we'll have a public hearing. I mean, obviously we're kind of going through this hearing process now, but it's not like prescribed in Mass General Law. We need to have public hearings about the final zoning, make any final amendments to that. The redevelopment board will issue a report to special town meeting, and that report is going to describe kind of this overall process, the recommendations, and why we're recommending what we're recommending. I can tell you that what we're recommending is going to be, the why of it is going to be because we heard from you all. I hope it's because we heard from a lot of people. And then that will go to town meeting, and town meeting is 252 residents of your 252 of your fellow residents. And part of what their charge is to vote on zoning amendments. And so hopefully at some point in October, these 252 folks will meet, and they'll talk about this, and they'll take a vote, and hopefully they'll recognize that whatever we're advancing and that the ARB is approved is a result of a lot of community feedback. And hopefully they'll adopt it. And that's what we're really aiming for here. So that's kind of the overall process. If it passes by November, we will also be able to participate in a fossil fuel ban pilot program through the state. And that will help us ensure that new housing and new construction and even some renovations are more sustainable. We can't participate in that pilot program unless we pass this zoning. So there's kind of a secondary benefit to it. Really, while we're doing this is because we recognize that we need some housing choice. We need different kinds of housing, and we need to work with the community to figure out where that appropriate location is. That's the overall process. I'm happy to answer questions about that in just a minute. But again, this kind of summarizes what I said, collecting the info from tonight. We're going to use all this info from the public surveys to create some scenarios, and we'll bring those back to you in May or June. I am hoping that everyone is okay since you registered for this meeting. I'm hoping it's okay with you if we reach back out via email. if I do that and you don't want to get emails from me, just reply back and say unsubscribe and I'll remove you from the list. But I'm hoping that because you're here tonight and because you registered for this meeting, you're interested in the process and you want to stay in the loop. So with that, I know we're getting close to 8:30, but I also am sure that some people have questions. So I'm happy to stick around if people have questions.
Yeah.
And we can just, if you want to raise your hand, feel free to, we'll call on anybody who raises their hand and we'll try to do what we can to help answer your question. So Susan?
Hi, Kelly. Great.
Hi.
It's been a great workshop. Thank you. My question is, you encouraged people to go out and share these visioning kits with neighbors and whatever. And then I assume that these would be returned to your office. And my question is, how do you know that those aren't just duplicates of, for example, say the people who are here tonight?
It could be.
Okay.
It could be just like somebody could take a survey more than once.
Yeah.
I would say that, it would take a lot of effort for someone to try to participate so much that they sway an outcome.
Yeah.
But, that's,
Okay.
that is, those kind of questions can actually come up in a lot of processes. And I think it's a good question to raise. We'll keep an eye on it. We have done visioning. We have done meeting in a box kits for other planning processes. And it's a bit of work. And so it would take quite a bit of work for someone to kind of load a project, if that makes sense.
Yeah, in terms of the numbers, like you say, that would really sway the difference.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Anything else?
No.
Okay. Elizabeth Carr-Jones. Hi.
Hi, I have a couple questions. One is I didn't hear anything about sort of infrastructure issues with the town. I know that certain parts of town are suffering from maybe capacity for water and sewer and different things like that. Also for flooding. I mean, flooding did come up, but I'm wondering if DPW has a report on what portions of town are sort of more vulnerable to overdevelopment at this point, more fragile. And if that should be playing into our decision-making process. And the other thing is that it did come up that that there may be sort of a reciprocity or whatever with our stretch energy code, but what about our affordable housing trust fund home rule petition? Shouldn't that be tied very tightly to this? I mean, it seems ridiculous that they would be asking us to cooperate with this program, but not giving us one of the biggest tools that we could use to guide development the way we would like it.
Could you, I'm a little confused. Well, I can answer the first question about infrastructure,
Okay.
but then I'm a little confused about your question about the home rule petition. So first, we are working, we've reached out to town departments. We're committed to keeping them involved on the internal side. And so, we'll be continuing to work with town departments as we move forward. So,
but has that stuff been mapped out? I mean, is it just generally known?
I think that's a very good question that we'll have to follow up on. I'm sure Mike Rademacher and his team will be able to give us an answer to that pretty quickly.
I also think this is a really, this is a very, very explicative of how a program like MassWorks works. It is based on development. So were we to get, I don't anticipate this, but so much development initially that it was so impactful to our infrastructure systems, we would be available to, we could apply for a MassWorks grant to install new systems. I think the other thing is, Arlington's been losing population steadily since the 80s. We were about 55,000 right around 1980, 1982, and that's as far back as the infrastructure goes. And as soon as you put it in, it immediately, You know, it's depreciating with every day. So this is actually, I think, a really great opportunity for us to potentially upgrade our infrastructure, you know, based on the development that comes in.
And the other part was about the tying the Affordable Housing Trust Fund to a fee on
Oh.
property sales.
Yeah, the
which
real estate
is-
transfer fee.
Yes, thank you
Okay,
for
sorry,
remembering the
that's
name
okay.
of it.
Yeah, I mean, I would say like we continue to advocate for that. We can't really, I don't think we are in a position to hold this process hostage to the state creating enabling legislation for a real estate transfer fee. So I think these are things that we can move ahead simultaneously. You know, I work with our Affordable Housing Trust. It's an amazing group of people who are working on a lot of different fronts to advance affordable housing in town. And one of those things is looking at an affordable housing overlay, which I think would pair nicely with MBTA communities, because it would unlock the potential for affordable housing that is easier to finance and actually like pencils out a little bit better to be created by right. As far as the real estate transfer fee, you know, that is a process. We're working with a number of groups in the state to try to keep on our legislators about that. But at this point, we're not willing to hold this process or to set aside the opportunity to participate in the fossil fuel ban pilot program or any of these other important initiatives, or be willing to forego $3 to $5 million of MassWorks funds because we're waiting to hear about a real estate transfer fee. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, it's just I wish there was some way for us to put the same kind of pressure on them that they're putting on us. You know, it's like why shouldn't we get that benefit out of this?
I do think it is important to consider like the scale of what we're talking about. You know, we're talking about maybe like 3 to 10 units development. We're talking about a 32 to 100 acre area, and I don't think I'm not quite sure that it's like well, I mean, I guess it's all relative. So as far as like how big something feels, but we're not really talking about 50 unit developments. We're talking about like smaller kind of infill and missing middle type homes. So,
Okay, thanks.
yep. Alan?
Thank you, Kelly. This actually relates back to what Claire mentioned, and going to the incentives. I guess I'd like to, I'd ask the working group for more specifics about what are the carrots and what are the sticks. In other words, MassWorks infrastructure program, I really don't know what that is. I don't know if we're already using it and we lose money, or if we haven't used it and we would forego an opportunity to use some of it. But you know, in more detail, dollars or specific programs that these incentives would fund or we'd lose. Just looking for more specifics to see, you know, how important are these incentives? Are they sort of nice, fluffy things, or are they crucial to our, you know, health as a community? So I'm just leaving that as a question for the committee. Sure. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. All right. We will definitely bring that to the committee. Winnell?
Hi, thank you. Winnell Evans. Since the passage of the ADU zoning amendment, wouldn't our R2 and up districts already, why not? I see you shaking your head. Why not?
Because well, first of all, those aren't considered individual units, right? They're attached. The second reason is that they are limited in size. You cannot build an ADU that's larger than a certain what is it, larger than 1,000 square feet or some portion of your current gross floor area of your home. Okay. And under section 3A, we can't limit the size of development.
Is there any thought to further amending the ADU bylaws so that it could potentially make these areas compliant?
It's something we could look into. I mean, I think what, like I said, we're kind of trying to figure out a little bit of where first, and then once we know a little bit more about where, we can start to talk about some of the details of the how. But I think it's a suggestion worth looking into. So thank you.
Thank you.
Mike?
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. Given that this is the MBTA Communities Act, I'm wondering what kind of commitment is there by the MBTA to improve their service to support the communities? I've been riding the T for 30 years, and I can tell you the service has never been worse than it is right now. It's slower, there's less of it, and there are more hiccups. As of right now, for instance, the red line is on half service. It has been for 8 months. There's no end in sight. Alewife Station, the lobby has been shut down for a month. There's no end in sight. And when those problems get solved, something else will come up.
Mhm.
So, while we continue to plow ahead with, increasing our congestion reliant on the T doesn't seem to be doing anything to improve their service to support us.
Claire, is there anything you'd want to share about that?
I think, I can't speak to the conditions of the T, which I think are very challenging. I mean, that's clear. I will say this, and we did meet fairly frequently with the folks who were doing the Better Bus network project, which has seemed to turn into the Less Bus network project. I think, what we heard at the time was, hey, we may not be able to provide as frequent service as we have in the past, but it's going to be more reliable. I don't know how that's played out. I think that was their goal. I can only hope that the MBT obviously is going to improve under different leadership, new leadership, and hopefully additional funding. But it has been made very clear, at least to the people who are running the Better Bus Network, that what they were proposing for Arlington was less than acceptable, and that we would be looking for, an upgrade to the service as we could provide more customers. I also asked them if they had looked at any future land use, while they were doing their redesign, and the answer is no. They redesigned the bus network to real-time conditions. So I think, that's a fair question, and it's a big question mark. How is the T going to be able to sort of fulfill the terms of MBTA communities? And I do not have an answer for you today.
Kelly Doherty.
Sure. And I have to say hi to Mike Blazek, who I used to work with years ago. Mike.
Hey, Kelly, how you doing?
How you doing? To tag team his congestion question, I do find it interesting that communities around the T have to plan for the future of the T, but the T doesn't have to plan for the future of our communities. But that aside, my issue really is parking and congestion on the roads. I know the town is looking at overnight parking, and I do think that has some, well, let's say it's just fraught with issues potentially. So I think that parking and congestion on traffic is going to be a huge component in terms of how how we figure out where it makes sense for some additional growth and those planning. I just want to make sure that that's integral to whatever we end up doing, because speaking as someone who lives right off Mass Ave in the Capitol Square area, the only reason people can go to the theater at night is that there is no overnight parking. And the minute there is overnight parking, I can tell you right now, the side streets are going to fill up. That's going to be 24/7. And it's going to put pressure on the businesses, both in the center and the Capitol Square and the Heights. So we have to be careful about how that's done. And I think we have to look at what they're proposing, in terms of what we're looking at as far as increased density, wherever we decide to put that. So I think that's key. And so I just want to keep waving that flag.
It's a great comment. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it comes up at every meeting so far. And it came up with UTL. It came up with UTL immediately, our consultant. So, which I mean, I think in a way, all planning is about parking, or at least it ends up being around parking.
It's true, yeah.
At least in the States. But no, this is an issue that we will definitely have to address as part of any zoning amendment.
Okay, thank you.
Don?
I'm going to say a forbidden word: schools. What planning provision is being made for possible need for expansion of our school system?
I don't know if Claire, if you have anything to say to that, I can. I mean, I actually know that Jennifer Seuss has some information about school enrollment. I don't know if Jennifer, if you're still here. I saw her here earlier.
Yes, I actually just raised my hand.
Okay.
Susie's at school.
She knows more. I mean, she knows more about school enrollment than I do. So I'm just going to go straight to someone who knows the data.
Yeah, so just a couple things. So when school enrollment becomes a problem is really at the elementary school level. So if we have additional students at the high school or the middle school, it gets sort of really annoying to schedule programming, but you can do it, right? The elementary school is when you have to talk about, oh, do we need to build an extra classroom here? Right now, Arlington has a lot of capacity at the elementary, or some capacity at the elementary level. Our peak population at the elementary level was in 2019. Arlington sort of overbuilt a little bit when they added on to Hardy and to Thompson. So they already, even in 2019 at its peak, had a couple of extra classrooms. I mean, not swimming in space. I don't want to claim that we're swimming in space, but there were a few extra classrooms, and that was the peak. That was projected to be the peak, and that was in fact the peak. The pandemic probably accelerated it, but I think we're probably reverting to the mean at this point. So you know, you talk to the superintendent, you talk to school committee members, there is capacity at the elementary school. You know, if we had 1,000 people move in the next month, obviously that'd be a problem, but the kind of housing that would be built for the MBTA communities would be gradual and over time. You know, we're seeing this gradual decline in the elementary population. So with a, you know, if it evens out and doesn't decline as much, it really won't be a problem. I don't foresee any new construction being needed. I mean, I have no idea what will happen in 50 years or 20 years, we know, but in next 10 years or something, not a problem.
Jennifer, are we still relying on the McKibben report from, I think it was 2015 for enrollment?
Well, I mean, it happens to be that the McKibben report and the actuals corresponded pretty well, but this is actuals, right? The peak in elementary school population was 2019. Even in 2019, there was a few extra classrooms available. So because Arlington overbuilt a tiny bit when they added to the Hardy and the Thompson, and they did that because it was sort of easier to add 6 spaces than 5, or, you know, it made sense. It wasn't just that they were overbuilding for the sake of it. It made sense in the way that those spaces were constructed. And so they overbuilt a tiny bit. The peak was in 2019. We're now in 2023. So we're talking about actuals, not just a projection. There happens to be a correspondence, but that's not what it's based on.
Okay, well, thank you.
I do want to note that, you know, like I want to keep going to this idea of capacity, because what we don't know is based on the scenarios that are determined through this, our zoning has to allow for a capacity of 2,046 units. And again, that's not on top of what's already there. That is as if nothing was there right now. So what we don't know right now is the differential between the capacity and what's actually there. And so I think that's something that, you know, I think whether it's talking about infrastructure or roads or parking or schools or a variety of other like things that we discuss as planners, I think making sure that we're remembering that we're talking about capacity and not addition is important to keep in mind. But I do think, you know, we'll have to run those numbers as we learn more. Kate Wilson?
Yes, I just had a question. I'm kind of new to this, so this might be something everybody already knows, but so say like, you know, these zones are created and everything, and some of them are set back from the main road. Would the town be able to limit like a developer from building a large unit on one parcel next to a bunch of small houses? Or like, you know, is the plan to allow for bigger units in some areas of town and smaller ones? Like, does the town have any say basically in how large of these units are, if, in different parts of the town, or is it up to the developer?
It's actually controlled by zoning. So, and in this case, the zoning is going to, and again, we're not at that point yet. We don't know what kind of height we're talking about. We don't know like setbacks or anything like lot coverage or all the other things that come into play. So those things have to be worked out. But the zoning is what controls what can go in, especially when you're talking about something that can go in by right. So if we're talking about multifamily housing by right, then if, like if you live right next to, if you're in an R1, a single family zone, and you live next to the B5, I don't think that actually exists, but let's pretend for hypothetical reasons it does. The zoning next to you is a B5. And so if something complies with that zoning, it can go in. And I think that's just something where understanding your zoning and understanding the zoning of properties around you, and also understanding that zoning can change, because zoning should reflect the vision and goals of a community. And visions and goals of a community, and again, while they're not necessarily monolithic, they do change over time. And so I think just that's where like understanding how zoning works and knowing where you are and what's around you is part of this discussion.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Susan?
Hi again. That raised her question raised a question for me, which is I think that she might have been thinking that anything that is zoned for the multifamily by right, that all the height limits would be the same, but I don't think that's the case. I think it's just an issue of it has to be multifamily, but can't you, like the one, you say that the multifamily in this part of town can only go 3 stories, and in that part of town, they can go 5 stories, something like
Great.
that.
Yes, and it looks like that is what she was saying. So good job. Yeah, no, it would be like we can create the zoning could be just one district, it could have sub-districts. And so, yeah, with the setting the height could be contextually based. It probably won't be single floor, but because we are talking about multifamily, but yeah, it could be different in different areas of town.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. And did you have anything else to add? Or any other questions? Okay. Anyone else? It is almost 8:50, but if I'm happy to take another question or two if anyone has anything they'd like to ask. Oh, Grant?
I do have one question based on an article in about Brookline's approach, and that they had mentioned in their town meeting that they would need a supermajority to pass what they were doing. And I'd asked the reporter, and he felt it was because they were doing it through a mixed use pathway, so it wasn't purely housing, it was commercial. Are we is that something we may face, or are we trying to aim for kind of a majority town meeting threshold?
I struggle to understand how. So I've looked at the what is it, section 9, 3A section 9. I've looked at it and tried to figure out how it could possibly require a supermajority and comply with MBTA communities. My understanding of the housing choice legislation that Governor Baker passed was that anything that allows for multifamily by right, any zoning that allows for multifamily by right needs a simple majority. And I'll post that guidance to the MBTA communities working group website. And that's where I haven't talked to anybody in Brookline as to why it might have been a supermajority.
Maybe the reporter got it wrong. I don't know.
That is also a possibility. So the way that my understanding of this and the understanding of different people I've been talking to is that we are looking at a simple majority vote by town meeting, not a supermajority. Obviously, it'd be great if it passed with a supermajority. I'd love to see the whole community get behind this because
That'd be awesome.
the process is so great. That would, I mean, what a goal, right?
Just really quickly with regard to Brookline, they're trying to do 2 things at the same time. They're trying to pass their MBTA community zone, and they're also trying to pass a form-based code. So this is a plannerly kind of situation. So
they're getting techie here.
they're trying to do 2 different things. So their MBTA communities is simple majority. Their form-based code is 2/3.
Okay.
Oh, Julie. Hi. Sorry, I didn't see your hand.
That's okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to first thank the entire planning department for being here tonight and facilitating this great conversation. And I just also wanted to say that I'm very excited about this missing middle. I took a screenshot of the image that you had up during your presentation, and I'm really excited about it. So just wanted to thank you all and say I'm excited to continue this conversation.
Thanks, Julie.
Thank you, Julie. You know what? I want to stop there. We will follow up. You will hear from us, and we will be sending out the survey. I would love it if everybody could help pass this around and get as many people as possible to take it. And as you hear about more meetings, invite your neighbors. In order for this to really work for the community, we need to make sure we're hearing from people. So thank you. This was not a short meeting. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you for being thoughtful and kind and courteous, and seeing us all as humans. And so this is great. This really makes me believe in this community. So thank you so much. Have a great evening.
Yay, Arlington. Thank you.